Loud. Okay, so thanks. Now we're on our final session of the program, and I want to thank you once again for being here and bringing yourselves to this program with a heart of goodness, because that was the topic, was how to maintain a good heart. And in the previous parts of this, I've talked about shamatha meditation and how meditation can slow us down so that when things start erupting in life and feelings start to well up within us, that we can find a way to react in a healthier way for us by slowing down our reactions a little bit, by injecting aspiration and goodness into our responses, and by trying to hold this good heart that Khenpo Rinpoche talked about when he said that when we create this wish to be of benefit to others, that can, as we nurture it, it can become self-sustaining and help us with every aspect of our life. And so in this last session, I want to talk a little bit more about mind training, but also discuss the creation of a positive environment around us. Remember, yesterday we were talking about the fact that people sometimes give more power to evil than they do to good, instead of giving equal power to the good that they can create in their lives. So I'm going to tell a story from the beginning of the pandemic to talk about environment and how we can improve our outer environment. Because we talked a little bit at the end of the morning session, about creating an inner environment of aspiration and nurturing that inner environment of aspiration. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the outer environment now. Because we don't live in a vacuum, we live in community with so many things and so many people and so many beings. We live in community, and how do we impact that community? How do we affect that community for good? And those of you who know my affection for the book, The Great Path of Awakening, know that there's a whole section in the book about interacting with one's environment and how to bring goodness into your environment. And just a little commercial here. Let me also bring up chat, and let's see if I can find it. KTD Monastery. I'm going to be teaching a program for KTD Monastery. I thought I tried to find this yesterday and I was not able, but I'm going to try it one more time. I'm doing an 8-week class on Great Path of Awakening starting in July. And then and then that will go all the way through to the end of August. And so if anybody has an interest in the course, you can. Yeah, it's not ready. We're not ready yet. I don't know what happened and why it's not here, but it's not here. Okay, I'm looking at the KTD calendar. It's a Zoom series of classes that will begin July the 13th, Wednesday, July 13th. So anyhow, if I find the link before the end of the class today, I'll add it. But in the Great Path of Awakening, they talk about making offerings to your environment. Yes, Linda, it will be in the evenings, Eastern time. So it'll be late afternoon for you. If it starts at 7 p.m. Eastern time, that'll be 4 p.m. for you on the Pacific. But this goes back, and then how do we work with the environment, our outer environment? Several people at the beginning of the pandemic called me or emailed me and said, how do we pray for this world? How do we pray for the world undergoing the terrible experience of pandemic. And on other occasions, people have asked, how do we pray for the world that where we're kind of destroying the environment? How do we pray for the world in terms of the worsening of society and so forth? And I remembered an excerpt from Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's teaching on the Great Path of Awakening, the mind training manual that I like to teach from. And it says that you should make offerings to all of the beings who live in your environment, and make friends with your environment. And he said, we're modern people, we're scientific and modern people, so we may not believe in environmental energies, and we may not believe in the presence of spirits and so forth who might be living in our locality. He said, but Tibetans have believed in them for a very long time. And in fact, he said, in the Tibetan extended family who would live together in a tent, very much like Native Americans would live together in tents. The Tibetans, like the Native Americans, believed in environmental energies and beings that live in forests and by rivers and so forth and so on, and that they actually had names for them, and that they would regularly make friends with them by making offerings to them. I remember when Lama Karma Samten from the center of New Zealand came to the West Coast, he was drawn immediately to the mountains along the West Coast of the United States. And he spoke. He said he went and spoke to Rainier. Those of you who are familiar with Western Washington State know that Mount Rainier is one of the tall mountains in the, I believe it's in the Cascades. I can't remember if it's in the Cascades, but I think it is. And it's one of the larger mountains there, and it's actually walkable. People can walk on Rainier. And so Lama Karma Samten said, I want to go make offerings to the spirits and the gods that live on Mount Rainier. And he would, every time he would come, he would go there and he would do this little practice that Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said that Tibetan grandparents would do every day in the family tent. He said in the extended family, the children did a lot of the work, but the grandparents also had a job, and their job was to pray for the family's well-being. And so every morning around the fire in the center of the tent, the grandparents would gather small twigs of juniper that would make a sweet smelling smoke. And they would put these twigs of juniper on the family fire. And then that would create an incense smoke that would go up through the top of the tent. And it was the grandparents' job to pray to all of the local gods and spirits who live in the area and ask them for their assistance. Rinpoche said they're not taking refuge in these gods because these gods are actually living in samsara with us. They're here in samsara with us. And so they're not transcendent. But he said it became the custom for the grandparents to make these offerings, and they would make them within the context of a Buddhist practice. They would pray to the enlightened ones and offer the sweet incense smoke to the enlightened ones, but then they would also offer to beings in the 6 realms and make the aspiration that the beautiful smoke the sweet smoke that they would offer would contain wondrous things. It would contain whatever the beings needed. If the beings were hungry, it would have food. If they needed shelter, it would be shelter. If it was clothing, they'd have clothing. And they would make the aspiration that everyone who smells the incense feels a sense of fullness and goodness. And by adding this intention to their prayer, that was how they prayed for a harmonious environment. And I said, now I can't tell you who are asking me for prayers about the pandemic, I can't tell you that this type of thing will be useful, but It's something that you can do for the environment, that you can do for the world by at least putting out some good energy and saying, hey, may the world be in harmony. May the world be at peace. May all of the things going on in this world be good. And I spoke to a friend of mine who is a non-believer in spirits, and he said, I said, doesn't it bother you that he said, no, he says, he said, even if these spirits don't exist, he says, if they do or if they don't, he says, it really doesn't matter, because he said, doesn't it make sense to be nice to your environment, whether there are spirits living in it or not? And, and that kind of like, yeah, right. Why not be nice to everybody, even the beings that may or may not exist? But we know that the Native Americans believed in them, and we know that they made offerings to them. And I'm sure that if the spirits did exist, I'm sure they were probably very disappointed when the Native Americans left the scene. And all of these crazy Europeans showed up who didn't know they existed and didn't make offerings. And then the Tibetans show up and they said, finally, someone we can talk to, but that's a joke. But in any case, I feel like, we need to do what we can do to improve our environment. And so one of the things that happened when the pandemic hit was that our masters went into the past, the canon of past literature, spiritual literature, and found the prayers that were offered in the 13th century by the Tibetan saint Tonton Gyalpo. And now that I've said 13th, he might have been 14th century, but in any case, it was somewhere around the 1200s, 1300s he lived. And that he did when Sakya Monastery was under siege by an epidemic. And the prayers that Tonton Gyalpo recited were prayers of asking for all of the local spirits to be at peace, and also asking for the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to grant blessings. And so I composed a short practice based on what Khenpo Rinpoche's advice was. He said, you can make up your own words. He said, you don't have to use a liturgy to make these offerings. You can just make up your own words. And so I looked at the liturgy we used when we were in 3-year retreat. And in the liturgy in 3-year retreat, they made offerings to 4 different groups. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas were, they were invited to a feast of this incense offering. They were invited, they were called the guests of offering, because they're above us and they're out of samsara, and we make offerings to them. May we become like you. May we become like you, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So that would be the first group of guests I named. The second group that is named in the text is the Dharma protectors, also enlightened beings. May you protect us and the Dharma. And the third group is all the beings of the 6 realms. May they receive whatever nourishment and goodness they need. And then finally, the fourth group that's mentioned in the text we used in retreat. The fourth group is the guests of repayment. The first is the guest of offering, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Second is the guests of qualities, the Dharma protectors, because they help us to nurture our Buddha qualities. The guests of compassion are the beings of the 6 realms of existence in samsara, and we call them guests of compassion because we offer them what they need: food, shelter, and so on. And then finally, the karmic creditors are the guests of repayment. We have harmed so many beings in all of our previous lifetimes that it makes a lot of sense to try to repay those karmic debts. And so these are generally what are called the 4 groups of guests, and they are named in virtually every one of the smoke offering practices you will see published anywhere. And so I just wrote up a little prayer because he said I could make up my own words if I wanted to. So I did. And so every day that I remember it, and I try to do it every day, I light a stick of incense. Now, those of you who live in red flag warning areas, you can't do this, but you can't put a stick of burning incense outdoors. But what you can do is you can burn the incense inside your house and open the window, and then the natural movement of air will take the smoke outside. I found that out in winter in Ohio from a second-story window, that you could make a smoke offering by putting a stick of incense just inside the window, and then the smoke would go out. So even if you're in a red flag warning area, so to protect from wildfires, you could do that inside. You can even do something totally wild, like Lama Namse Rinpoche used to do. Lama Namse Rinpoche had an electric stove in his house, in his kitchen. And I came to his house one day, and the kitchen door was propped open, and there was smoke coming out of his kitchen. And I said, "Oh my gosh, but is something wrong?" And he actually had a cast iron pancake griddle on the stove, and it was singeing incense. And so he just opened his kitchen door, and hey, Lama Namse, that could be a fire hazard. He says, no. He says, very easy. He said, very easy. Oh dear, I love Lama Namse. He was one of a kind. Very easy. So this may or may not appeal to you. This type of offering may or may not appeal to you. But I love the idea that we can make friends with our environment. And this is one of the ways we can hold a good heart. And I see, yeah, Linda is saying plants and trees too. I have to tell you, many people have asked the Dalai Lama if trees are sentient, or plants are sentient. And he said, we don't know because we can't speak to them. So that tells me that they might be, they might not be, but they might be. And so, sure, you can include them in the 6 realms of existence, And he said, at the very least, there are beings living in the tree. It's the home for many beings. So, he said, so whether or not the trees themselves are sentient, they harbor sentient life, So we can send goodness in this way to everyone. So I just wanted to mention this idea of making a daily incense offering to all of the beings who live in our environment as a way of extending our love and compassion in a material way. And you might say, what's material about visualized offerings? And Khenpo Rinpoche said, believe it or not, he said, it creates a mind of virtue in you. He said, whether or not it truly benefits the other being, he says, depends on the power of your meditation, he said. But, but at the very least, he said, you're creating an environment of virtue inside your own mind by offering, because you can see how you feel when you offer something, as opposed to how you feel inside when you grasp something and are stingy with something, and how that feels, how tight-fisted and painful that feels when you're withholding something. But then when you give it, it's a different feeling. So anyway, so along with aspirations, there are offerings. And even if, again, if this is not something you wish to do, you can also just make offerings on your shrine, on your Buddhist shrine. I have some bowls of water here that are offerings of all of the that signify and symbolize offerings of all of the sense objects being offered to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas represented by the various statues on the shrine. And there's candles here. Khenpo Rinpoche said, when you offer candles, whether they're electric candles or any of the types, these are soy candles. I was told that that these are good to offer by people who are who are not interested in burning petroleum products. It's a very interesting thought. So you can make offerings and have this feeling of offering. And when you receive something new, Kemper Rinpoche said, you can imagine you offer it to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and then that they give it back to you. And so in this way, you continue to hold that heart of goodness throughout your day. When you receive something new, you offer it, and you have this sense of being part of a larger environment. So anybody having any comments, discussions, experience with this, something you'd like to say regarding this? We're open. The question is open for business. I may put my buddy Helder on the spot. Hey, Helder, can you tell the story about your making offerings in your backyard?
Yes, so I live in Clintonville, close north of Columbus, and this is like a very, it's not like a rich area, so it's like a middle class area. There's a lot of people that comes here and leave. They're like workers from, pizzerias or restaurants and stuff like that. And I come from a Native American tradition in Brazil. I study a lot, and I like to be involved with the environment. So I talked to Lama Kathy, and she said, you can do always some offerings outside, like for the Buddhas, for the Bodhisattvas, and this will make you gain merit, right? So I started doing this, and I was doing this practice, and a new neighbor came to my neighborhood, and he was like addicted, drug addicted. So I said I need to improve my offerings, like do more often or do something, because he was a very troubled guy. So I just kept doing, and I felt that with time, maybe in 6 months, he started to get better, show a nicer behavior, or at least be more sensitive to people around him. So for me, all the offerings has been helping a lot, and I this is my daily practice. I just did mine. That's why I'm out of breath. I was running, so I have like a Amitabha Buddha outside, and I put some oranges for him, like a fruit, and then the incense, and have a crystal and shells. It's all this nice stuff. But my experience is that it helps the environment to be more nice, I think, because I also have a cemetery on the street behind me. So I think there's a lot of spirits and souls around. So I think, every offering you can make, it will help the environment, the animals that eat the fruits, or, stuff like that. It will get better. And also, like Lama Kathy just said, like you feel better if you're doing. So.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that story, Helder. I appreciate you letting me put you on the spot there. Those of you who have seen the, I was just reminded again of the Buddha of Oakland. If you have not seen the short film, The Buddha of Oakland, you can put it in your, you can Google it. And it has to do with a traffic island in Oakland, California. And this traffic island was in the middle of a working class neighborhood, kind of like what Helder is talking about. And this traffic island they would put trash on it. People would just heap up old mattresses and trash on this traffic island. And the neighbors got tired of it. So one of the neighbors said he just wanted to do an experiment to see what would happen. So he put a Buddha image. He got one of those ceramic backyard Buddhas. And he put a Buddha, or concrete, excuse me. And he put this white concrete Buddha in the middle of the traffic island. And the strangest things started happening. Some of the Vietnamese neighbors started coming over and putting offerings in front of the Buddha, and started cleaning up the trash. and people stopped dumping trash on the island, on the traffic island. And then the Vietnamese women kind of got a little out of hand. They built a shrine around the Buddha image. They added more Buddha images. Other people brought Buddha images. Other people brought offerings. Casual passersby would offer incense. And then eventually one of the sons of one of the Vietnamese women had to stand with a stick and be a traffic guard while the women prayed. It was a thing. It was a thing, but it actually kind of like did something. It did something to the area. And so I just love the whole idea. And so these things, anyway, just thought I'd mention that. Buddha of Oakland.
I just want to mention, Lamak, that one of my neighbors, after he saw my Buddha outside, he's Catholic, and he put an image of Saint Francis outside of his yard. I said, that's all good, we're all for the good. So
Oh, I love it. I love it. Yeah, that's really awesome. I see. To me, yeah, I think there are a lot of. I see you grew up in Brazil, right, Helder? Okay, I grew up in East Columbus, Ohio. There were a lot of Catholics in my neighborhood, and we had like the buried bathtub, Virgin Mary grottos in people's front yards, where they would bury half of a bathtub. I mean, it was crazy, right? But they had these like little altars to the Virgin Mary, and so yeah, it's really actually all good, Okay, let's see. Let's see. Let's see oh yeah, Kyla asked about the guests. I typed it in. The enlightened beings are recipients or guests of offering. The Dharma protectors are recipients of quality. The beings of the six realms are recipients of compassion, and karmic creditors are the recipients of repayment. And I make the aspiration that when I make these offerings, that for the enlightened beings, may we become like you, enlightened beings, in this or future lives. To the Dharma protectors, may no obstacles arise on our path to enlightenment. That's the job of the Dharma protectors, to help us with our obstacles. And that's why they're called recipients of quality, because the Dharma protectors help protect us against negativity, which would get in the way of our dharmic accomplishment. And then the beings of the six realms are recipients of compassion, because they're the ones who are with us in this world, and we need to feed them and take care of them. And then the creditors are recipients of repayment. Because we pray that all of our karmic debts are fulfilled. So there you have it. So hooray, right? So anyhow, other questions that people might have, or comments, or just anything? And no? Okay. Well, then maybe it's time to meditate, and we'll sit for, we'll do a little sitting practice. Let's see. All right, so let's see. This time we'll do just some quiet sitting meditation. And we'll follow it up with a little bit of Tonglen. We'll sit for about 2 minutes, and then I will ring the bell again, and then we'll do a little bit of guided Tonglen meditation. So it will probably be sitting for a total of about 5 minutes, something like that. Okay. Okay, putting the body in the posture of meditation and bringing the intention into our body, and bringing our attention to the breath, or whatever our chosen object of meditation is. We make the intention that we will practice meditation for the next few minutes for the benefit of all sentient beings. And we begin by taking one deep breath and breathing out, and then allowing the breath to be natural. And if you're using the breath as your object of meditation, you observe the breath as it comes and goes. And as you notice that your attention wanders from the breath, you gently, with this feeling of gentleness, bring your attention back to the breath for a fresh start. So we'll start with a couple of minutes of quiet meditation. Okay, now we'll do a little bit of Tonglen meditation. We can imagine that in front of us are all of the beings of the world. All of the beings of the world are gathered in a great crowd in front of us. And we can think that as we breathe out, we give goodness to them in the form of light and goodness. And that when it touches them, it benefits them and brings them happiness. And as we breathe in, we can think that we remove from them all of their suffering, pain, and difficulty, and that removing this, they are relieved. When we use our imagination and bring this suffering into ourselves, the suffering meets with our pure bodhisattva motivation, and all of the suffering, the imagined suffering, dissolves into nothing and disappears. And then with the out breath again, we give goodness. The in breath, we remove suffering. So we'll do this meditation for about 2 minutes, and then we'll return to our group discussion. Imagining sentient beings, and as we breathe out, we give them goodness. And as we breathe in, we remove their suffering. That's a little bit of meditation. Nice to be able to do that during our program. So thanks for taking part. One of the things that came up in yesterday's discussion was the question of feeling disconnected from people in during the pandemic and in the aftermath, and with all of the divisive things happening in society now. It's as she said, what did she say? She's the woman who brought this up, said that there was a little bit of fear and the kind of the wish to sort of burrow into the into the ground and get away from it all. And I'm wondering myself if maybe this is also related to what some people have been calling compassion fatigue, you know, where people are just worn out and worn down by circumstances. And I'm wondering if maybe Tonglen could be something worth trying to correct this feeling of disconnectedness, because in the Tonglen practice, we forge a connection with all beings. And we do it through our pure intention of wanting to benefit them. And we rehearse and practice the idea of being disposed in a kind way toward them. And in this way, we sort of feed that part of us that is kindly disposed toward others. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that, but I sort of wonder myself if maybe Tonglen couldn't help us feel more connected. So anybody have thoughts about it, comments? Questions about the Tonglen practice that we just did? If you want, you can type them into chat. If you want, you can raise your hand, so forth. Any comments or questions? Yes. Yeah. Hi, Linda. Yeah. I see Linda. And if I didn't see your hand, you can follow up, Linda. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I know after I do practice Tonglen, I feel different than after just a regular meditation practice. And I feel like, you know, it sort of opens up the heart in a way that, you know, regular meditation doesn't always. And so that gives me a really good feeling of peacefulness and open-heartedness and softness that I think then I'm able to pass on to others, at least for some short moments. Yeah, so I do think it's very beneficial in that way for me.
I appreciate your sharing, you know, your experience with this, because I feel like we need to have a safe environment in which to practice compassion, you know, a feeling of safety, because when we're out in the big world, lots of things can happen. And our attempts at compassion can be clumsy, maybe, and not skillful, and maybe even rebuffed, you know. But on our meditation seat, we won't be rebuffed, you know. And whatever we offer is, you know what I mean? It's like whatever we offer, it can be seen to be a benefit. So I think that I appreciate your sharing that, because I myself have always felt better after a session of Tonglen, although some other people report to me that sometimes Tonglen makes them feel a little overwhelmed, you know, because there's just so many beings and so much suffering, you know. But I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah. Other folks have something to share. Yes, Christy.
I was listening to an interesting Dharma talk in the wake of the shooting in Texas. And this was a Zen woman teacher. I'm sorry, I don't know her name. It was on the Lion's Roar website. But what she was saying was that there was an organization that's been doing research into the shootings.
Uh-huh.
And what they have discovered is that hate is not the motive, that comes way at the end of a long series of things. And what really precedes it for the shooters is this sense of disconnection, that they don't feel known or seen or heard. And not living up to the expectations that somehow the society has created, that they should be a certain way, and they're not that way. So they feel suicidal, but with such anger that they're going to take other people with them. And so it made me think that we do Tonglen to connect ourselves, but it made me want to pray that no one be disconnected, that no one feel outside of a community, because that's where the problems are coming from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. I appreciate you sharing that, because that's a view I think that, that I haven't heard, the idea that people might feel ineffectual or unseen or unknown, and that they want their message to get out, whatever that is. And I myself have also thought of them as elaborate suicides. That and there is, and I also have noticed that some of them have to do with immediate violence toward women, because some of the shooters have killed their mothers, or in the case of Uvalde, his grandmother. And, with that sort of, that's a kind of a frightening thought, of wanting to make them disappear, so these are all, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Because I think being able to feel some compassion for their situation is important, Yeah. Other things that people might want to share or talk about? Regarding Tonglen in particular? Oh, yes, Elizabeth. Oh, sorry, Elizabeth. I'm sorry. I'll have to ask you to unmute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot that. I feel so involved that I forget about unmuting.
Oh, it's all right. It's all right.
So it seems to me in the past when, I've had specific instruction in Tonglen that we've often been instructed like to first do it for someone that we love, and then someone that we're indifferent to, and then move on to somebody that it's harder for us to feel love for. So, I mean, is there a reason why you chose to do, just this more generalized practice of Tonglen? Because at a certain point, I started to think, well, this is really abstract.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remembered, that other way of doing it from the past.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche chose to, he's taught it both ways. And this was one of the ways that he taught it. The other way was the one that you learned, where you start with those who are close to you and then extend the love and caring to those who are more distant from you, and then finally beings that you're in conflict with, and so on. So he has taught it both ways. For a general audience, it is a little easier to teach it with all sentient beings at once, so that it's not too complex for people. But you're right, sometimes it can become abstract with that many beings being considered. So yeah, you can think of specific people among the crowd, of people, and especially if that helps it helps you connect to the practice and make it more real for you. I think that's good. Yeah. Other comments or? Yes, Roger. And then Janet. Yeah, Roger and then Janet. Sorry if I got you out of order there.
There's also the process of also doing Tonglen with yourself. Sometimes we also need to hear our own suffering
Yeah,
and then move on to other people. And I found that very beneficial.
that's absolutely right. I tell people that especially when they are feeling exhausted or like they're at the end of their rope, you know, that they can start by doing Tonglen for themselves, breathing in and accepting how they feel, and then breathing out and nurturing and healing to themselves, and then breathing in and accepting their feelings, and then breathing out and giving themselves healing. And then Rinpoche, when he talked about this, he said, if you start with yourself, he said, then as soon as you finish doing it for yourself, he said, then you can do it for people who feel exactly like you. And then after that, you can become more general doing it for others. And then finally, he said, always end the meditation with all sentient beings included. That way, no one is left out. So I appreciate you sharing that. Thanks, Roger. And I see that Janet and Julie have also got their hand raised. So Janet, now you're next. Thank you, Roger.
Yeah, kind of along the lines of what Christy said about being disconnected. Several years ago, I wrote a book and I collected diary entries from women who saved their diaries from their teenage years and issues that affected their self-esteem. So some went on to have eating disorders, some alcohol problems, and they all, the bottom line, the common thread was feeling disconnected. And I also read, in my research, I read the diaries of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. They were the Columbine shooters. And they, that was the total thing with them, is they felt disconnected. So I think that's, we're on the right track with helping, you know, practicing compassion to help people feel connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am both touched to hear about your research and your project, and also it is sad. Thinking of those two young men has brought me to tears more than once, because of the sadness of such a life, where they felt they needed to become killers, and they became that. They built the fantasy world in which they would do this grand, amazing obliteration, and it just makes me really sad, because it puts them in a very complicated karmic position. And the people they killed also are now, they are in this karmic relationship that's going to kind of continue to, go for a while. And so anyway, but compassion for that. And I appreciate you telling the stories of the people who aren't heard. So thank you for that. My degree's in journalism, so I appreciate that. And I did 15 years a newspaper reporter. So I only covered one amazing murder trial, and that was enough. Yeah, so there was a set of serial killers who started their killing spree in my little town that I live in. And I was, and I was in on the whole thing at the beginning and followed the police investigation. And it was just to find out what was in the minds of these people and to go to the trial. And it's very, very sad. Again, people, they have a really skewed idea of their place in the world, and they choose to do these crimes as a way of forging their own path in the world. And it's like, yeah, it's lots of sadness there. So I appreciate you trying to illuminate
Yeah, and they're almost always, as far as the murders, they're almost always have been bullied.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's tough to be a human being and then be given all that power. And so it's, well, that's a whole nother discussion. So, but
Yeah,
thank you for,
exactly.
thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Let's see, Julie.
Sorry if there's any background noise happening. There are trains and cars honking and things happening here.
Sure.
Yeah, along the lines, we learned, I've been a nurse in long-term nursing care, assisted living, and we learned about the principles of Eden and just, speaking along the lines of this with the school shooter and, loneliness and boredom are some of the most painful feelings that we can experience. So it's, this pandemic has added a whole new twist to all of that for different populations, not only the elders that we take care of. But my question, I've been through a lot of Tonglen meditations in recent years, and a teacher once taught me on the first step, Lama Kathy, that we visualize our minds as being limitlessness
Mhm.
in the first step. And
Mhm.
I don't really hear that step anymore. And I just wondered, I mean, I
Yeah.
can't imagine that would be a bad thing to still do, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so I just wanted to
Hey, no,
chime in with
thank you.
that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it found its way, it found its way out of my instruction because I connected so strongly with the presentation that Kemper Rinpoche himself made in his book Dharma Paths. And now I pretty much exclusively use that presentation to introduce the practice. But you are right. When I first started teaching Tonglen, and even sometimes now, depending on the circumstance and the experience level of the people learning it, I will start with a short reflection on the limitless nature of mind, because that's actually in the text, that we reflect briefly on the limitless nature of mind before we start the practice of Tonglen, and recognize that the mind has no color, it has no shape, it has no location, it has no beginning, it has no end. And as such, it has a limitless capacity to give and a limitless capacity to accept. And I don't teach it that way now because I'm opting for simplicity.
Mhm.
And thank you for reminding me about it, because I have to teach it again coming up for this 8-week class, and who knows, right? Who knows?
I
It might return. It might make a return.
I've noticed in the times that I've done Tonglen and forgotten that step, that I get overwhelmed more easily because I've forgotten that mind is limitlessness. And anyway, thank you.
Yeah.
That helps.
No, I can't help but think that it's a good thing that you mentioned that today. So I often get cues from the environment, and so I thank you for sharing that. Yeah. There's time for one more. Is there one more out there? Just want to make sure I don't miss anybody if you have a question. Sherry, by the way, yeah, and I forgot this in the chat, asked if I could share the instruction on that smoke offering. And so I'm sharing it now there in the chat. And that's a link to a Dropbox where I typed up the instruction on how to do that daily smoke offering for the environment and for beings. Okay, just looking over one more time, just to make sure. No questions. Okay. then the very last section of our conversation, I want to mention a couple of things. And the first is that Tonglen is the doorway for us to make all aspects of our life meaningful. Even our suffering can be made meaningful. And to introduce this idea to you, I'm going to share screen briefly here and show you an article from Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche that is a discussion of his teachings on Tonglen in everyday life. This will take a moment. You would think I would be able to find it quickly, but it doesn't happen like that sometimes. Here it is. Okay. See if this does it. Yeah, there we go. So this article is based on a teaching given by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche in 2002. And he says that the goal of Buddhist practice is to pacify our minds. And he says, well, why is this the aim? He said, when we have different thoughts, the mind pushes us to do whatever it thinks. Therefore, all of our physical and verbal actions begin with the mind. So if we work with the mind, we work with our thoughts and also with our actions. Then he said, when the mind is well trained, it's like a well-trained horse. It will obey its master. And if not, like the untrained horse, it can harm and even threaten the master's life. So it's important to train the mind. And the initial technique of mind training is shamatha, which is calm abiding. And it's important. They call it shine in Tibetan. It's important for beginners because he says that first, the mind is very vulnerable to distraction, like a round object placed on a table has a tendency to roll. And shine or shamatha helps the mind to develop stability. But he said developing calmness is not the final stage of meditation because we still have our neurosis, our negative mental afflictions. Our kleshas as the final stage where these thoughts of neurosis are uprooted. We need the other skillful means of Buddhism. And he said we should recognize that mental happiness does not come from an external source, it's internal. And so we should see that internal happiness as the ultimate happiness. If one is aggressive or one is unable to experience any inner happiness, even if external conditions are good. The remedy for this is to develop love and compassion, which destroys hate and all other afflictive emotions. Then he says, attachment, aggression, and all other afflicting emotions come from grasping at the concept of self. Since we're preoccupied with the self, we forget about others. But when we have true love and compassion, we're not concerned with our own needs only, but instead are concerned with the needs of others. He says ignorance is eliminated once we have developed loving kindness, which is the absence of anger and attachment. And in the absence of ignorance, one will know how to help others. In essence, we become selfless. And he says, when we talk about becoming selfless, people tend to get frightened because they think that being selfless means they will not take care of themselves. But becoming selfless actually means caring without clinging. And I think this is an important distinction. Unconditional caring, caring without clinging. When we have no fixation on the self, we have the capacity to care for others. But to overcome this notion of self, which is so strong, it's been with us forever, we need to train our minds. What we're doing is, in essence, changing our habits. The Bodhisattva Sutra says, give yourself to others, and contains stories of how bodhisattvas or Buddhas in training have given even their bodies when it was necessary to benefit others. But we're not being asked to give things like this blindly. We're being asked to give when we're ready. And to get to the highest level of giving, we must first learn how to give. So we have to make a habit of letting go and detaching ourselves from self-clinging. And the main practice for developing this letting go is Tonglen. And so he talks about the practice, again, the very simplified practice of breathing out goodness to others and breathing in and removing their suffering. And he says Tonglen minimizes and gradually uproots conflicting emotions and engages us physically, mentally, and verbally in accumulating merit and developing tolerance. This explains the expression, enlightened beings have reached enlightenment by working for the benefit of sentient beings. Sentient beings remain in samsara because they're working for themselves alone. So by letting go, we work to benefit others rather than working merely for ourselves. But he said, it's not just something you should do when you're sitting in meditation. It should be part of your life wherever you go, where you live, where you work, where you eat. He says, when you walk, review thoughts like these in your mind. May all beings experience happiness. May I take upon myself the suffering of beings. When you breathe in, think, may I be able to take on others' sufferings. When you exhale, think, may I be able to give others merit and happiness. Then he says, in fact, you can even use your own conflicting emotions to practice Tonglen. The text on this practice gives a slogan about this: 3 objects, 3 poisons, 3 seeds of virtue. When training the mind as beginners, we still have a lot of neurosis, thoughts of neurosis, neurotic thoughts, but we must first know how to handle them. The text implies that we can transform conflicting emotions into virtue, but how can we do this practically? He says, first, we must apply mindfulness. So that's the first step. For example, the moment we are aware that we're experiencing anger, another conflicting emotion, we should think, may I experience the neurotic emotion of all sentient beings, and may all sentient beings be free from that. This way, the emotion itself is not positive, but the way you have handled it is positive. And you actually accumulated merit by handling it in this positive and constructive way. He says, similarly, when you make a mistake out of confusion, instead of giving yourself a hard time, you should accept the mistake and realize that it arises from the confusions that come from your negative karma. Think, everybody has made these mistakes, so now I take on all of their confusion. So even if you make a mistake out of confusion, it can become an object of virtue. In short, you try to make it a habit to think of other sentient beings' welfare and practice accordingly. You have to be able to practice everywhere. When you're practicing anything, meditation, a sadhana, or whatever, think, I am practicing to benefit living beings. In the beginning, middle, and end of the practice. He said, you can even transform sleep into the practice of virtue. If you go to sleep thinking, I will help living beings, your sleep will benefit living beings. But you must remember to do this every time you go to sleep, even if you wake up during the night and then return to sleep. He says, since we need to have a technique for accumulating merit in everyday life, even if we can't sit down and practice. If we can think of others, we're practicing. That's really important. If we can think of others, we're practicing. If we enjoy a meal and we think of sharing the joy that we feel with others, that is practice. In this way, every activity of life can become practice. This, again, is very important for us because we may not be able to spend a lot of time on our cushion, but every aspect of our life can become infused with the wish to benefit others and can actually become a source of virtue. So he said, we must immediately share mentally any happiness or joy we feel and immediately take on the sufferings of others. Tibetans are trained to think, if something makes me happy, may all beings share in this happiness. If I meet circumstances of suffering, may my frustration eliminate the suffering of all sentient beings. In this way, Tonglen is the origin of immeasurable merit. And by practicing it, we break through fear and ego clinging. With it, we become courageous and tolerant and become willing to work for the benefit of beings. So actually, I re-edited it in 1990 and 2002, but actually this teaching comes from 1991. It's an old one, but it's one of my favorite teachings of his ever, because it was really where it's really where this really made a huge difference for me. Hearing this teaching made just a giant difference for me, because I realized then that all of my thoughts, feelings, and emotions, even the sad ones, could be of benefit to other beings. And when I talked to Ken MacLeod, the one time that I got to meet him, the translator of the Great Path, he said that this practice of Lojong is genius. He called it genius, because it's not just mindfulness, it's mindfulness plus virtue. We're actually using our mindfulness to key into virtue and increase our virtue little by little by little by little, with absolutely everything that happens in our life. When we're happy, we can practice. When we're unhappy, we can practice. No matter where we are, we can practice. And that includes painful situations, being in hospitals and seeing people suffer and suffering ourselves and so on. And so I just wanted to make sure I shared that, because for me, that is a key piece in learning how to hold that heart of goodness, because it's one thing to generate a heart of goodness, but it's another to hold it. And it really does come down to trying to remember every day. And so what you can do is every afternoon, my watch goes off at 4 o'clock and it asks me the same question. How's your bodhisattva vow? And I can think about, like, at that moment, like, well, how is that going? Oh, well, I had kind of an okay day, but some of those things I said, I probably shouldn't have said, or things I've did, I probably shouldn't have done. And so I regret the bad and rejoice in the good, and let's keep going. And we can do this every day by having a regular practice of coming in front of our shrine and saying our refuge prayers in the morning and the evening, and then in between filling in with these thoughts of being of benefit to others, conscious thoughts of being of benefit to others. And then that way we can hold it. I see Marianne is, let's see, Marianne is saying, rejoicing in practice in all we do and experience. Oh, yes, Marianne, that's right. And then John is asking if the article can be sent via email, and yes, we can do that. Let's see, the one that I will do my best to get both of those sent to you. I'm trying to think. Okay. Okay. Right. So in any case, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I did have one more thing I wanted to share, but let's see what folks think about this. Thoughts, responses? Yes, let's start with Janet.
Let's see, let me lower. In what you read, there was a section about, may I experience the neurotic emotions of a sentiment of sentient beings, and may all sentient beings be free of that neurotic emotion. What I liked about that is, it's kind of like the way out is through, and it's like, instead of resisting my anxiety, to feel my anxiety. And it made me kind of wonder if when I'm in the midst of my anxiety, if I do that and experience the anxiety of all sentient beings, maybe it will amplify my process of going through it, because I'm totally absorbing it all. I mean, maybe it'll amplify the healing for me and for them if I'm expanding that experience.
I think you're on to something. Right. Yeah, here's I'm going to type into chat the formula that I tend to use for this process. Let's see. I'm sorry to take a moment here.
And then my thought went to, that could even be, it could turn into a selfish motive by being altruistic enough to want to help everybody, but to think that I'm going to accelerate my own healing by doing it.
Well, you know, I understand. Yeah, I get what you're saying. And you know, the very fact that you think about that,
Uh-huh.
you know, the very thought that you think about that means that it's not like you're inoculated against it, but sort of, because I mean, we have to be in a balanced position. We have to both recognize that it is beneficial for our practice to give to others, but we still have to give to others. You know, so it's like we have to try to stay with the sort of pure aspects of what we're doing and dismiss the impure aspects.
Yeah.
And so if you'll, yeah, and I'm really happy. I'm very glad you put these two things together, because that was what happened for me when I recognized that I didn't need to fear
Mhm.
my feelings, because, right? So you're identifying how you feel. Then you universalize and say, there are lots of other beings on the planet right this second feeling exactly what I'm feeling. So I think of all of them. And then I say these words: may my conflicting emotion or my anxiety contain the conflicting emotions of all sentient beings. By contain, it's like your emotion becomes like a little vacuum cleaner, and then, you know, sucks up all of the
I like
negativity,
that.
of the world, right?
Yeah.
And then by my working through this moment of anxiety or this a moment of conflicting emotion, may we all be free of it, and may we all become Buddhas, which is the complete freedom from this. And this formulation that I've put together, friends of mine printed them on little business cards, and I used to hand them out to people, and I still do. I still have a bunch of them. Somebody bought me a box of them, you know, and because I feel like this little formula gives structure and framework to a healthy way of being with
Mhm.
my emotions, right? And it allows me to engage with them, but engage with them in the context of a formula or of a framework so that everybody's safe. And it gives me some way to then sort of plow my feelings into something beneficial, you know, like I'm planting something, if
Ooh,
that
I like
helps.
that. Thank you.
Yeah. I just now see someone has joined, and I don't know, I can't remember if she was in one of the earlier sessions or not.
Yeah, she was.
Okay, very good.
Sheila?
Yeah, it's like, thank you for joining. God love her. This is great. Okay, so so Janet, I think you're onto something. I do. I think you're onto something. And that what I have people do is I encourage them to read that little formula every day to them out loud to themselves at least once.
Mm-hmm.
And that they do it every day and every day and every day, even if they don't need it, that they just recite the formula every day. And then there will be a moment when you need the formula and it'll just pop up because you've got it memorized.
Yeah.
That's how I did it, was that I just recited it every day, even if I didn't need it. But then it would be there for me when I needed it to be there.
Yeah.
And so it gave that framework, and I just loved the constructiveness of it, how pragmatic it is, how constructive it is. Yeah. Gives you some place to go. You don't have to deny the feeling, right? You just don't go down the drain with it.
Yeah.
Because you see, like, it's like there's me in this thing I'm scared of, right? And so then I go around and around and around, and it's like I can't get off the wheel, right? It's a hamster wheel. It's just going around and around and around. But if I take a moment and take that one step back, remember we talked about this yesterday, shamatha allows us to discontinue a thought, right? Without blame. We can discontinue that thought without blame. It's okay. We don't have to worry about it. We can let go of that thought. And once we learn to do that, we learn to take one step back from the story, one step back from the thought, and then examine it and say, what's the better way to approach this? And then you can plug in the formula, and it becomes a new way of working with things so they're not so overwhelming.
Mhm.
And I think this is also, I think, something that will touch on what Julie was talking about, which is like the feeling of being overwhelmed by things, because I have felt so overwhelmed by so many things in my life. And I don't know if that's what you were talking about, Julie, or not, but sometimes I just felt like that, and that this helps me feel less like that. So other things that people might want to mention. Oh, I just thought I've got one more thing to say. Sorry about that. So Ani, about faith, here's the deal. I think that in my own heart of hearts that the proof in the pudding, right? The proof is in the pudding, right? The proof is in the eating of the pudding, right? So it's like, so when we are able to do these things, when we're able to take one step back from an emotion that used to overwhelm us, right? Even if we can just do it once, where we step back from an emotion and it actually lessens in its intensity, and then we can work with it. That to me that helps faith to understand that the Dharma can help us in the midst of all this turmoil. And is karma true? It feels like it to me. But I don't have to believe in karma to know that when I cause pain to somebody else, I'm hurting myself, right? And when I'm helping somebody else, I'm helping myself. I know how those two things feel. And so whether karma is philosophically true or not, I don't know. I don't know about that, but I know that when I do good, I feel good. And when I do bad, I feel bad. And for me, that's enough to have faith in at least this small microcosm of karma that's in my life, right? And so, and are the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas really out there? And do they really care? Well, if I can feel that way about my grandmother, which I do, I actually feel she's kind of still out there and still pulling for me wherever she is. I think I can feel that way about the Buddha, so I'm talking about faith a little simplistically, but I don't know if that helps with what you were wondering or not.
Yes, it does help. I have no issue with karma because I relate it to the principle of magnetism. And I think it's a physical reality. And maybe I don't see the result of behavior right away, but that's only because I don't understand all of the ways that karma comes to fruition, or all of the ways that karma ripens. But I have no issues with karma. I understand it in a limited way, in my own, given my own intellectual limitations. I think at times, it's the faith in the spiritual aspect of things. And that comes and goes, crises occur, and then good times come around, and then faith is restored, and then crises occur, and then good times come back around. And so I have somewhat resigned to that accordion feeling of, open and close, because I've resigned only because I have no other recourse. I can't, it isn't that I've given up. I'm more or less resigned to the fact that I don't understand it, and it's okay. And it's not because I'm limited in one way or another. But thank you. I think those are more encouraging ways of looking at it. And especially knowing that when we do some of these practices that are, given to us, and that they do alleviate suffering. So one can do nothing but have more faith. Thank you. Thank you for the reminder.
Oh, no, thank you. No, I appreciate what you've all brought to it. And I thank you for sharing your thoughts about that. When you're talking about karma the way you are, I think about Pema Chodron's statement. She says, your mind is like the sky. Everything else, it's just the weather, which I just thought was a brilliant statement. Your mind is vast and open like the sky, and everything that happens in it, that's just the weather. And it will come and go, and it will ebb and flow. And so I appreciate that. Yes, I see Candy has her hand up. Yes.
I know it's time to go, but I just have to ask you this personal question real quick. It's big, but have you been able to see your past lives through meditation? I have been told that I could if I could meditate deeply enough, and I'm just so curious because you've been on this path a long time.
I have to tell you the absolute truth is no, but here's the thing. I asked Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche about this one time. I actually did very early in my Buddhist career. I had heard the same thing you did, which is that if you meditate deeply, you can see your past lives. And I also told him that I had a friend who practiced hypnosis, and then he claimed to be able to show people their past lives. And he basically said, I said, what do you think about the knowledge about your past life? And he said, to be honest, he said, it's really pretty irrelevant. He says, it's really pretty irrelevant. He said, I kind of think people mostly do it for entertainment. He said, really, he said, and most of the people who claim to be able to show you past lives, he says, they're just charlatans, and they're trying to take your money. He said, all you need to know about your past life. And then he quoted Guru Rinpoche. He said, look, if you want to know what your past life was, look at your present situation. Do you have resources? Do you have relative health? Well, then your karma was pretty good from previous lifetimes. And it doesn't matter who you were in those previous lifetimes, because you're done good, because here you are, right? And so often when people will compliment me on something, they'll say, oh, well, you're good at this, or you're good at that. And I'll say, well, thank you. I guess in a previous lifetime, I must have done something. And so I can thank myself in a previous lifetime for this. Thanks, previous me. And then I tell people, and then Guru Rinpoche said, if you want to know who you're going to be in a future life, he said, look at your present actions, thoughts, and words. So that means watch your P's and Q's, number one, right? It means to watch yourself, but also to do as much good as you can. Here's a person, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, who I feel arrived at the Bhumis and probably could see all of his past lives. But did he talk about that? No, he didn't talk about any of that. What was he doing? He was building temples and stupas and leading people on pilgrimages and making offerings. And he just never got tired of virtue, of doing virtuous things. So sad to say, I have never meditated to the depth where I was able to achieve the first bhumi of Bodhisattva awakening, which is when you see your past lives, is when you reach the first bhumi of Bodhisattva awakening. So that didn't happen yet, but I'm not disappointed, because I know that if I just emulate what Rinpoche did and do as much virtue as possible, that I'll get there. So I don't have to blame myself for not meditating deeply enough. I can just say, that's okay. I'll get that next time if I can't get it this time. And Rinpoche said one more thing. He said, look, he says, if you're not sure you're going to attain Buddhahood in this lifetime, he says, I got some advice for you. And we're all like, yes, Rinpoche, yes. He says, if you don't know that you're going to achieve enlightenment this lifetime, he said, make a deal with me and meet me in Dewa Chen. And I'm like, what? And he's like, no, it's the pure realm of the Buddha Amitabha. And Amitabha Buddha said, even like average people can get into this pure realm, and they can receive teachings from the Buddha Amitabha, and they can get enlightenment super quick. And he said, meet me there. And I'm like, yes, sir. So I got a deal with a guy who's gonna hook me up, with the Buddha Amitabha. So this way, even if I don't meditate deeply and don't achieve Buddhahood in this lifetime, I got a chance. And if you haven't watched Mingyur Rinpoche's teaching on Dewa Chen, you got to see it, because he is so funny, because he teaches people how to get to Dewa Chen. He says, you want Amitabha Buddha's address? I've got it. And I mean, you just have to hear it. It's brilliant. He's very brilliant. Mingyur Rinpoche is just brilliant. I don't know if that answered your question or not. Did that help?
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
There's hope for all of us, right?
Thank you.
There's hope for everybody. I know. I feel like I'm, what was that? Who was that talk show host who said, you get a car and you get a car. You go to Dewa Chen and you go to Dewa Chen. It's pretty good, Okay. Time-wise, I guess we have to stop. Nuts. That's too bad, isn't it? But I really, really appreciate having been asked to come and give this. It's just, I'm really, really happy. And oh, by the way, Helder is put down in the chat that the Karma book that we talked about earlier is a really great book. And that helps you to understand a lot more about karma, which is awesome. So thank you for sharing that. So this is where we have to stop for today. But boy, thank you so much for inviting me to come to your place and talk about these things that are so important to us. Let's sit quietly and dedicate some merit, shall we? We dedicate the goodness of this session to all suffering beings. May we all be able to share each other's burdens. May we all be able to take good care of our good selves and to accumulate goodness in our hearts and hold that heart of goodness in the midst of everything. May we have a belief in basic goodness and a belief that we can attain goodness for the sake of all beings. We dedicate this to all sentient beings in this way. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Lama Kathy. Thank you.
I will attempt to get these videos put up online on YouTube tomorrow. I don't know that I can do it today, but I will do my best to get them up there for you. And just thank you for bringing your goodness today and
Thank you.
and contributing to what we've got here. So
Thank you very much for this.
Thank
Yeah.
you, everyone.
Thank you so
good health
much.
and long life to
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you, Mama Kathy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yay.
Thanks.
Okay.